Welcome to Behind the Curtain, where we discuss everything from aliens and conspiracies to ancient civilizations and religions, all from a biblical perspective.
All right, Genesis 3, Josh.
Genesis 3, let's roll.
Are we jumping right into it?
We don't need introductions.
No chit-chat?
You don't know who we are, then that's your fault. Let's go.
I didn't read anything interesting this week outside of Genesis 3 studies, so yeah.
I was just telling you off the mic here a second ago that I was up till 2 a.m. I was studying Genesis 3, but then of course that broke off into probably about 2 hours of rabbit hole videos on YouTube.
So were you cramming?
No, not cramming, just brushing up.
Yeah.
Brushing up and maybe looking for some new little nuggets here and there, but the nuggets were deviated far down the rabbit hole that we probably won't venture into today.
Yeah.
But it was definitely fun.
Well, y'all are going to love me because in studying Genesis 3, I found more things about Genesis 1 and 2 that...
We're going to go right back.
So we need to redo that whole episode.
1 step forward, 3 steps back.
Oh, man.
Dude, I mean, that's how... It just goes to show, like, how dense and how, like, full the Bible is of, like, information and revelation. Yeah,
man. And it all connects. Like, you can't... I don't know. I was listening to something about this the other day that, like, I think you mentioned at one point, too, that people don't... in modern times, you know, if you're just a lay person and you're not studying this and you're not familiar with what you're looking at, you don't take time to think about the genre. Like everybody goes, oh, the Bible's the Bible. Right, and everything in it is just Bible.
Exactly.
But
yeah,
like,
it's just magic
there's
book.
so many different types of writing in the Bible and different authors. It's not all by the same person. And each one of those people lived at a different time. They use different forms of writing. They use different images, different language.
Different backgrounds. I mean, it's everything. But yet, the single storyline of Jesus
the Bible
all the way through.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Genesis is, I mean, it's a history, but we mentioned this in the last episode that we're not getting science lessons out of Genesis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, we're not trying to, like the vegetarian thing, you know, we're not trying to say, oh, lions ate fruits until after the fall, you know, like we're not trying to learn science from this. We're not even, a lot of people want to use Genesis 1 and 2 to disprove evolution. And while I personally don't really jive with evolution, I don't think that that's an adequate way to use that. Right. You know, there's a lot of Christians that are legit God-fearing Christians that believe evolution.
I think a problem, and I had this problem for a long time, and I'm still learning to deal with this problem, is if it's not your view, you won't put any effort into the other side. Yeah. You just dominate your view and, you know, regurgitate whatever you've learned. You don't really look into the other side.
And it's also, too, I think a lot of times it's like first impressions. Like if you're reading the Bible, like I started going to church when I was very little. My parents took me to church. And so I learned those Bible stories the way they were taught in my church and the way that I read them. And you kind of stick with how you learned it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's hard to relearn things.
Yeah, Alberino mentioned that last night in one of the videos I was watching.
At 2 a.m.
Yeah, he was like, we have this like Sunday school indoctrination problem.
Yes.
Where we, you know, we grow up as kids and we hear these stories and it's just Bible stories, you know.
Yeah. So, you know, we haven't really addressed the topic of inerrancy, and that is not in my outline for today, but it might be a good place to just say, like, what is inerrancy and how do we approach the Bible?
Too.
Yeah, inspiration.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is, like I said, let's use evolution as an example. You know, can you believe the creation story and believe in evolution and believe the Bible is inerrant? And I think the key there is taking a step back and saying, well, the message of the Bible is clear. Yahweh is God. Jesus is Lord. Jesus died on the cross. Like, there's some things you cannot divorce yourself from.
Sure.
in the Bible. But again, it's not a science textbook.
Exactly.
You know, there are people that use the Bible to prove flat Earth, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that would have been the view of the Bible readers, the Bible writers. Was
some
that?
of them,
that
for sure.
There's a firmament, there's a dome of heaven, that covers and.
I was listening to some Revelation commentary, and there's a really interesting word in Greek that gets used in Revelation. It might get used in other places, I don't know, but it literally translates to mid-heaven.
Middle Earth?
Yeah, Middle Earth. But no, it's the angel is shouting, and it says that all creatures in heaven and earth could hear him at the same time, hear and see him, right? That's the implication. And it uses the word, he was in mid-heaven, is basically how it translates to English. And so it's like, well, if the earth was flat, everything, he could stand in the middle basically, and everything would be able to see him. So that's an interesting.
There's interesting things on all. When you really think about it and you really look into it, all sides has some interesting points. And it's kind of that, that analogy of the blind guys feeling the elephant. It's like, oh, I feel I feel like something feels like a foot. Oh, I feel like something feels like a trunk. It's like they're getting all this parts. But
this part's hairy. This part's smooth.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like all these weird things, but they all go together.
Yeah.
So if we can get everybody to get along, we can put all those pieces together.
Yeah. Well, I think I think the main thing is just be aware of your biases and your predispositions, and kind of set that aside when you read the Bible, because there's a lot of times when I've made it an exercise for me when I read the Bible is to say well, this is really a lesson. This really goes beyond biblical study. It's really just about being open-minded and being mature, being able to learn and stuff. But there's always two questions I ask myself is what if I'm wrong, right? And then what would the implications of that be? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of in logic. They talk about I forget the Latin for it.
Reductio ad absurdum.
Absurdum,
teasing it out to its logical conclusion.
Exactly, going to the extreme. Right. What's the conclusion? Because if the conclusion, or if it doesn't stand up, then your premise is wrong, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of times I read the Bible and I genuinely have to sit back and say hey, here's what I believe about Jesus, but what if I were an atheist? Or what if I were a Buddhist or something? Yeah. What if this is wrong? What would that mean? And there's a lot of times you go full circle and you're like, well, no, Jesus still has to be Lord because none of this other stuff would make sense, right?
Right. It's cool, man. It's a fun adventure.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to ask questions. I wish I thought about doing it. C.S. Lewis has a pretty good quote in his book, A Grief Observed, because he's talking about the death of his wife.
Yep.
And he literally talks about how I don't think God is scared of my questions, basically. He has a whole chapter where he goes in and says what if God is a bad God? What if what we think is good is not actually good, and he's torturing us and C.S. Lewis goes off on this crazy.
Yeah, he is brutally honest.
And then
I remember that book.
Yeah, at the end of the chapter, he's just I don't think that, but I'm not afraid to ask.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, inerrancy. We believe that the message of the Bible is inerrant, but it's dangerous to take it as a science textbook.
Right. It's not everything is literal.
And then we also have to be aware of our biases, and we can't be afraid to ask questions and be flexible and see what happens. Right.
Yep.
So those are kind of the two things we're going to say going into this, because we might go into some weird things. Josh was telling me before the show what he was reading before.
Oh, bro, yeah.
He was reading at midnight last night about
talking about Nephilim bloodlines and U.S. presidents.
U.S. presidents.
Pretty interesting. Well, I was telling you about this girl back in 2015, this 12-year-old girl that did some research and found that 42 out of, this is during the Obama reign, 42 out of 43 presidents are blood related. In some way. In some way or fashion. And the reason that nobody had ever noticed that before, they had done blood studies and relative studies on presidents before, but they only studied through the male line. She did the male and female line. And that's how she got that they were all blood related in some way or fashion.
Yeah, so if you think your votes are picking the president, then...
No, not at all. The Anunnaki are running the reptilian...
Well, that was before Trump, and we know that
he's
the best,
it was before Trump, and Trump is the savior of the world, and but then he was cheated again.
Best. Everyone agrees.
He's the best.
Ask anyone.
I'm coming back. I'm coming back big. I'm going to do it big, and I'm going to do it strong.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah. Well, that idea of, we talked a little bit last time about dominion. All man-made forms of government, are they like innately evil?
We don't know if we even mentioned her name yet. So Dr. Laura Sanger is...
Yeah, you mentioned Nephilim Bloodlines a second ago.
Super dope.
So.
Yeah, I said Nephilim Bloodlines, but I didn't say her name. Go check out Dr. Laura Sanger. She is dope. I thought she was super kooky when I first heard her. And I was like, whoa, what in the world is she talking about? But the more, kind of like Tim Alberino, it's like the more you listen, and kind of more like, okay, I understand what they're saying now. It's like, yeah, that's right on. She's awesome.
Yeah. We don't want to go too deep into that until we get to Genesis 6, though.
Sure.
So...
We say that every episode.
You look at the way God set things up, it was very theocratic, right? He was God. Adam was his steward. And then when Adam failed, he made Israel, the nation of Israel, and Israel was meant to represent him. And now it's the church, right? And so it's always meant to be like God is the head, and now we have Jesus as a mediator, and his people, his humans, his church are the ones that are supposed to bring... Well, I don't want to give it away because it's part of what I want to talk about today. The idea of light. I'll just say it that way because we discussed that last time.
Yeah.
You know, when he gave the commandments to Israel through Moses, they said, like, if you follow these commandments, the other nations should look at you and say, surely the Lord is God.
Yeah.
Because of the way Israel lives, basically. And then, there's similar passages about the church in the New Testament. How do we get from this to Genesis 3?
I don't know, but the first sentence in Genesis 3:1 is going to be a doozy.
Yeah. Yeah. I pulled maybe 4 or 5 major topics out of Genesis 3. My outline's not as long as last week. But yeah, right out the gate, you read Genesis 3:1, and it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?" So we're not going to talk about the question yet. We're just going to talk about this character here.
Yeah, well, I'll even say just the first 3 words, now the serpent.
Now the serpent.
So it's like, whoa, put on the brakes.
Yeah.
Now who's this serpent?
And this is where, again, that Sunday school mentality of...
Exactly, yeah.
You get the image in your head of Adam and Eve chilling under this tree, and the little snake hanging out of the tree.
Yep.
And kind of,
Eve,
hey guys,
do you like apples?
So I was watching Robin Hood, the old Robin Hood cartoon with my kid yesterday.
The Disney one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, classic.
With the snake.
Robin Hood and Little John running through the forest.
That's what I think of, man. Just a little snake hanging out of the tree.
Oh yeah, the snake. The Messiah.
The little snake hanging out of the tree. And
yep.
Did God actually say? But, okay, so... why isn't it weird that, like, why would this even be in the story? Why a serpent? Why isn't Eve freaked out by a talking snake? Could animals talk in the garden? We're going to talk about this character real quick. And the word serpent is kind of the key. The word serpent here is nakash. And it is one of 3 words in Hebrew that gets translated serpent. And the other 2 being seraph, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And the other word, I don't think I pronounce it right, but it's tannin, which is like sea serpents. It usually represents like monsters or chaos or something.
Chaos dragon, yeah.
Yeah.
There's another word for that.
That's actually the word that is used in Genesis 1 when it says that he created the fish of the sea. It says that he made all the creatures and the sea beasts, basically. Mm-hmm. It uses that word, tannin. It doesn't use like a word for fish. Okay, so what it says is that he created God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves with which the water swarmed. And so it does say sea monsters, literally.
So there you go, there's monsters in the Bible.
Yeah.
So that word nakash you were saying in the Hebrew for serpent, now I think that breaks down into 3 different things, right?
Yeah, so if you, now this is new for me, so I hope that I don't butcher this explanation. me not knowing any Hebrew at all.
Well, I have it pulled up here.
Well, so Hebrew is a consonantal language.
Yeah, there's no vowels at all.
And so it's basically just the letter. If in English, it's just the letters N, C and S and H, right?
It's something like that. Yeah. It's
okay.
But yeah, they have the later on they developed these little punctual marks that would identify, how you would pronounce, if there was a vowel there. But like in this case with the nakash, which means serpent, the Hebrew root is the basis for the noun, the verb, and the adjective. So if you take it on its normal noun meaning, which most commentators, everyone in the world takes it on that meaning as a noun, that it would just mean serpent, or it's the word serpent.
Yeah, that's like the easiest, most straightforward way to...
Yeah, like easy pickings, it's a serpent. If you take it at its normal verb meaning, the word here would mean deceiver or diviner. Actually, I saw one that I was reading last night was somebody who projects omens.
Oh,
so witchcraft, spells, cantations, like that whole deal.
Yeah, a fun connection to that image about divination in I wrote this down in Acts 16 when the slave girl is following Paul around and he casts the devil out of her. It says that the slave girl had a spirit of divination, but the word in Greek there is python. That's where we get the word python from.
That's dope.
It's python. Wow. I had to do the pronunciation on it, but yeah, it's where we get the word python. And so she had a python spirit. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And of course, that word is a snake.
Yep.
That squeezes you.
Just throwing that out there that connection has existed for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that I was thinking about late last night also was, so it's traditionally held that Moses wrote Genesis. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but a lot of scholarship leans that way, that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. Yeah. And don't you know that Moses grew up as a Hebrew, he was a Hebrew, but he grew up as an Egyptian.
Yeah.
So he spent his entire life.
Like in the Pharaoh's house too, so well-educated.
House, very educated, very smart, culturally as an Egyptian.
Yeah.
So when he's writing this about creation, he's writing about all of these accounts and these characters and what's going on, he's going to have it writing from an Egyptian-esque point of view.
Yeah.
Like it's going to, the things that he's learned throughout the years and the things that he's seen and the symbology and what he's been taught about religion and the spirit world is going to influence, the way he's writing. And so it's funny that we have this serpent imagery a lot throughout the Old Testament, but a lot in Genesis.
Yeah, more on that in a second, because there's the third form of that word, nakash.
Right.
Let's get that first.
Yeah, if you take it as an adjective, so you got the noun as a serpent, verb as a deceiver or diviner. As an adjective, it would be the shining one.
Yeah.
Or the brilliant one is like the connotation is like polished brass that's shining from the sun.
Yeah, so the adjective shining. Actually, the International Standard Version of the Bible says, now the shining one was more clever than any animal.
That's crazy.
They actually chose that interpretation.
That's cool. And I love what Dr. Heiser says on this, of course. He thinks that we shouldn't pick just one of them, even though each one of them are correct, and how you would use it as a noun, verb, or adjective. But he thinks that all three are at play, that this is not just a serpent, it's a supernatural being using some sort of deceiving divination and is very shiny and very brilliant being.
It would be a triple entendre.
Right, exactly.
The idea is that when somebody read that, again, because the vowels are kind of inferred,
right,
you would have had all three meanings come to mind when you read it.
Right. Something else he was talking about last night was...
last night when you were on the phone with him?
Yeah, when I was in my 3-hour rabbit hole of all this stuff. He was talking about, because the criticism of like, a talking snake, that's so ridiculous, But he said the readers at that time, they weren't stupid. Like they knew that animals don't normally talk, right? Mm-hmm. But the gods can do what they want, right? If they want to talk through an animal, they can. Yeah. If they wanted to. We see that multiple times in the Bible, actually. But he said it would have been a signal for them in the story when they hear serpent and then they see it's talking to Eve. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. That's out of the ordinary. Yeah. Like, what's going on here? He would have said, that was another thing. In Egyptian culture that Moses would have been influenced by, in Egyptian culture and Egyptian religion and stories, lots of animals talked. You look at their pantheon, a lot of their gods are part animal, part human. And he says, so in that culture, in that mindset, it wouldn't be, it was a God thing. It was the gods are interacting with humanity through an animal type being somehow. So when they heard, okay, there's a snake and he's talking, what's going on? Okay, something's up. This isn't normal. Yeah. The gods are up to something. Let's really pay attention. So that was like a marker.
So even if you saw it as a literal
Even if you saw it as a snake, it still would have been connected
to is a clue.
A divine being.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I think a lot of people, again, when you take it at face value, it's just a snake. And so the fact that it's talking, I think we even get that much in English, like snakes don't talk.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
And it's so sad because I know people that have heard this story in Genesis and go, snakes talking, really? That's ridiculous. I'm out. And have left the faith because of stuff like that. Yeah. Like claim to be Christians, and then they're like, when they get a little older, they're like, oh, snakes talking, that's just...
Well, and that is because in the modern scientific era, exactly. Like most people, even most Christians, are actually naturalists.
Oh, very much, yeah.
Like naturalism, in case anyone's not familiar, is just the idea that everything has an explanation, like in the natural world.
In the natural world.
And so, a talking snake...
He's not demon-possessed, he's got a mental issue.
He's got a mental issue. Or like, Jericho's a good one. I saw History Channel do something about the marching around Jericho, and did it do something to the structure of the wall and the sound vibrations?
The History Channel is awful.
So here's the thing. I said this last time. False dichotomy. This is like the most popular logical fallacy. Right. Why can't it be a natural and a supernatural explanation? Yeah. Like, don't you think God would have known how sound waves interact with whatever? So
the supernatural interacting with the natural. Yeah. Or changing. I mean, you see Jesus telling the storm to be calm. That's the supernatural interacting with the natural. Yeah. But the History Channel, I've seen, dude, they did a whole thing about the Exodus. And it was like, the reason the water seemed to turn to blood is because in this certain area of the Nile, there were these algae that were down at the bottom of it, and they were colored with a very amber color, and it stirred up these algae, and it's like, wow. I mean, they did so much to cover.
So that's naturalism. And I feel like a lot of Christians, again, because there are things that we don't understand reading the Bible in the modern day, just because our culture kind of fails us in that respect. We don't have a lot of the context. And so we want there to be a natural explanation. And if we can't find one, we kind of skip it. Yeah. Right? Like, and so even the serpent, I feel like it's easy for Christians to go, well, I'm reading the Bible that's talking about God, so it's okay for there to be some weird things. So I don't know why the snake talked, but that doesn't make it more than a snake. Right. That's not a good conclusion. That's not it can be more than that.
Right. And it's okay if you want to think it's a snake. That's fine.
And again, something having a natural cause, like mental illness, like you said. Right. There can be natural and spiritual components to things. Jesus healed people who had, the boy that it says he cast an unclean spirit out of that was having convulsions and throwing himself into the fire and that kind of thing.
Trying to drown himself and burn himself on
tell me that wouldn't get diagnosed as a mental illness today. And yet Jesus was able to heal the boy, So it can be both. It can be both. So that I'm going to get a t-shirt that says that it can be both. That's going to be you're going to hear that every episode of this podcast.
I'm going to get a shirt that says it's not a snake.
But it has to be very glittery.
Very shiny. A bling bling shirt.
Circling back to the mention of Moses and Egyptian iconography. Yeah. Okay. Because you're right, like Moses would have studied in Pharaoh's house. He would have been very familiar with language and religion and politics and all that stuff.
Yep. And snakes are huge in Egypt.
Yeah. And then even the average Israelite, I mean, they were slaves, but they had been in Egypt for 400 years.
For a long time.
So like they know what's going on.
They would have saw snakes on a daily basis. So you look at the headpiece of Pharaoh, like it's guarded and it's mounted with the cobra, and the idea of the throne guardians, the seraphim, were snakes with wings.
Yeah, a lot of Egyptian writing, when you have a god or a king sitting on a throne, there are snakes on either side, like cobras on either side of the image of the throne.
Yeah, they've even found like archaeological findings of Hebrews depicting the throne of God with seraphim snakes on each side.
Yeah.
You can go look that up. It's really interesting. I don't know the details of what it's called or whatever, but I've seen it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so
like
to
early
our
Christian artwork of that.
To our keen podcast listeners, this may sound familiar, because later in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden, there's a cherub that guards the garden, right?
Yeah. He's got a lightsaber.
Yes.
He's got a lightsaber at the...
That's awesome.
It's the first time you hear Star Wars in the Bible. And then there's Endor.
Dude, Star Wars?
Dude, yeah.
Oh, Elohim Wars?
Oh,
come on, man.
Gosh, Elohim
Come on,
Wars.
bro. Star Connection.
The hosts of Heaven Wars?
The Star Connection is everywhere.
The Stargate Wars?
The Stargate Wars.
No, but yeah, there's a lightsaber. There's the planet Endor.
We're definitely referring to it as a lightsaber from now on.
No, it's definitely... I mean, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was a saber of light.
So
I just totally ruined your train of thought, dude. I was like, lightsaber.
Let me get back on my track here.
Boom.
There's a cherubim in the garden. We talked a lot about Ezekiel 28, where it says you were an anointed guardian cherub.
Yeah. So we definitely need to compare Genesis 3 with Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28.
Yeah.
And I think when you honestly do that, Ryan, I think when people honestly do that, when they compare those three areas, they'll see that it's not just a snake. Like it's not just an animal that's, just somehow mimics, speech. It's a divine being.
Yeah. Well, just quickly to drive this point home, Ezekiel 28:14, you were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain in the midst of the stones of fire you walked. So there, guardian cherub.
Right.
So that uses the word cherub again, like in Genesis later, but and then you have Isaiah 14. Let me pull that up real quick. Actually, the other one I was about to mention was Isaiah 6, where Isaiah has the vision of the throne, and he says, it says, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne. Above him stood seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. So that word seraphim, that is the second word for snake that we mentioned earlier. Seraph.
Seraph, yeah.
Exodus.
And Numbers, I think.
Is it? It's when they're going
burning
through
snakes.
Yeah. They're grumbling.
The fiery serpents bite them, and then to be healed from it, they have to look at the seraph on the pole, the bronze snake.
So the word for those vipers is seraph. It means it's based on the root to burn.
Right.
And so it gets used for these angels in Isaiah's vision, seraphim, the burning ones, right? So again, you kind of have a double entendre of like glowing or on fire. Remember stones of fire from last week?
Well, then also this, Ryan, real quick, is a lot of scholars, they'll put that word fiery serpent or burning serpent as being poisonous, that they were bit by poisonous snakes.
Yeah.
So they had a
fiery
burning bite to them.
Burning sensation.
And I think that goes right along with the poison coming out of the original rebel's mouth to Eve.
Yeah, that's
true. That it
true.
was poisonous.
Yeah.
It was very poisonous. The wisdom that he was, the knowledge that he was providing was poisonous.
Yeah. Seraphim, burning ones. This for snake, and it also means to burn. So there's a double entendre there in Isaiah's vision. But you may notice Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6 is a throne scene. And so these are again throne guardians, just like in Egypt when we said that you would see snakes on either side of the throne. Well, Isaiah sees that when he has his vision. He sees seraphim surrounding the throne. We know that Eden was God's house. It was the holy mountain. We talked about that last week. And there was a guardian cherub mentioned in Ezekiel 28 and in Genesis 3. Okay, so yeah, that's all the connections between Nakash and seraphim and cherubim. Like it is snake imagery, It's shining.
Check this out, dude. I'm looking at Brown, Driver, and Briggs' commentary, which is not usually the best commentary in the world, but their notes on seraphim right here are pretty interesting. They're saying, that seraph their beings originally mythically conceived with serpents' bodies. So it's a serpent body, a serpent deity, and they cite Isaiah 14 and Isaiah 30, personified of lightning. That's kind of cool because, Jesus says he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
Yeah.
And lightning, I've never noticed that before, the personified, that idea of the shining and the bright and the brilliance, lightning, and like even like Thor and Zeus, they're the motif of lightning.
Well, doesn't I think it's in like several the prophets and Psalms and Revelation. It talks about lightning surrounding God's throne,
the throne of God,
flashes of lightning.
Yeah.
So maybe that is a connection to heavenly beings.
Seraph being around the presence of God. Yeah,
that's really interesting.
But another thing and this breaks off into conspiracy theory, which is fun. We don't have to go down that trail right now, but just a little tidbit. It's such a big joke in the conspiracy area of the internet of the reptilians, the reptilians and the lizard people and all that stuff. But really, you can connect if you really want to logically. It's not a big jump to say, hey, maybe these people are seeing serpent-like deities, these seraph, like the devil is. Yeah. Maybe that's what he is.
Well, and even, again, I mentioned earlier that even in Greek mythology, there's the connection between the word python and divination, and so
I mean it's not too far fetched.
The whole reptilian race theory, right. It could be evil
and
spirits.
if you are a Christian, you should hold to the idea that there are spiritual forces at work in the world.
Yeah,
they're operating through and for different things and people, and they're trying to steer the course of history in a certain direction. That's away from God, so it's not far fetched.
Yeah. Oh well, I want to say this about Shining before we move on.
Before we get too deep in the conspiracy world.
Yeah. Oh no, we can keep talking about conspiracy.
Yeah, I love it, man. That's it. I mean, it's just not a big leap for me.
Yeah, they don't have to literally be lizards in.
Right. They're just like serpentine
Men in Black.
In some kind of way.
Edgar
right.
Suit. It was like he was wearing an Edgar suit.
Yeah, he's like water, sugar water.
Yeah. No, it doesn't have to literally be a lizard person in a human body.
Right.
It could just be like the influence of an evil spirit.
Right. That has a serpentine type nature or something. Yeah, definitely.
The Shining, this kind of came up in the last episode, but I wrote it down for this episode, that in Ezekiel 28, it's when it talks about this cherub, it says that they were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was their covering, and it mentions them: sardis, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle. That sounds
carbuncle.
Sounds like something you get on your foot, right?
That sounds like something like my grandparents would eat or something. Hey, would you like the last carbuncle?
And then it says crafted in gold were your settings and engravings. Now that's the shiny imagery, right?
Now, you blew my mind last episode about gold and where it comes from. I never studied about gold, so I never knew any facts about gold.
Well, and that's just a scientific fact, but coming from a theological, biblical side, it's interesting to think like maybe, because if you believe the Big Bang and stuff, they would say that when gases and things mixed and the earth was formed and these things compressed, like gold appeared, or gold was formed inside the earth. And then the other theory is that like when certain meteors or whatever have hit earth, maybe it's come from space and been deposited in places. But when God made the garden in Eden, it was in Eden.
There's a lot of gold.
And so
God likes gold, bro. Like the tabernacle, his house that he had, the Israelites build and stuff. He's like, I want my house filled with gold.
Yeah, I think everybody understands gold is like rare. It's precious. It has like it's conductive. It has some cool properties like about it. Gold is really interesting. But
like the Baghdad battery. Have you seen that?
Oh no, I haven't.
We'll have to talk about that later, I guess.
Come on now.
I don't think it was gold. I think it was copper.
But yeah, the image of shining, it mentions all these stones in Ezekiel 28 that were set inside of the cherub, and that it was set in gold, Well, then when you see in Exodus the description of the ephod that the priest wore, it has the same stones, sardius, topaz, carbuncle, emerald, sapphire, diamond. Yeah. They're all set in gold filigree, right? And he would wear that when he would go in before the Lord.
Chest plate.
And so it's almost like when you get a job and they're like, this is our dress code. It represents that the priest was now part of the divine council.
Wow.
You know, that's crazy, right? And then the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21, guess what? The walls and everything are built out.
Why have I never connected that, Ryan? And why have you been hiding this from me the whole time?
I've been saving it for the podcast, bro.
Jeez, man. You're making me look like I don't know jack.
No, man.
You're like, oh, Josh, let me show you this. Did you know gold is from space? Like, wait, what?
You were studying aliens and stuff, and
I know, I've been on the alien trip.
Studying rocks.
You're studying the rocks. Oh man!
But the New Jerusalem has the same. That's
hilarious.
At the end of the story, when Jesus comes back and sets his kingdom in place, the walls are built of jasper. The city was pure gold.
That's dope.
The foundations of the city had every kind of jewel: jasper, sapphire, onyx. It names all of them.
Right.
And so that is a picture that again, this is where we get back into genres, literary genres in the Bible. The authors are using this language intentionally. They're going, I'm trying to explain to my readers, my audience, that this is a divine image.
Yeah.
These stones are, they're there.
So what do you think about people that use crystals and different stones to get energy and?
Yeah, man, that's one of the things that people.
Interesting things about, because I was always taught, oh, just write that stuff. That's New Age. Don't think about that stuff, and it is, but. There might be something to it, I mean, God created these rocks.
Well, dude,
God created all this stuff.
That's again, I'm using my rules that I set up earlier. If I say, hey, what if?
Never know.
And then the other thing too is the naturalism, being aware of that dichotomy. Just because it's a rock doesn't mean there's not some spiritual.
Yeah.
And if you're into New Age and Eastern mysticism and spiritual mysticism and spiritualism stuff, and you are trying to reach out to spirits and connect them with these rocks, it doesn't matter what properties the rock have. Maybe the rock means nothing, but look at how idolatry worked in the Old Testament. It was a house for a spirit.
Right.
That's how idolatry worked. But yeah, I think a lot of people, when they read about idols in the Bible, well, first of all, idols now get treated like, oh, if you're addicted to gambling or
everything's
sports,
an idol.
That's an idol.
That's how I learned. I was taught that, if it's something you're addicted to or something you do a little bit too much, is this an idol?
It's becoming an idol.
And I understand what they're saying.
Yeah, it's not.
You don't want it to become something more important than God.
Right. Yeah. Do you devote your time and your money to this when you could be sharing the gospel or
idolatry? I love how Alberino talks about idolatry. He's like, that's not idolatry. He's like, that's just a sin. That's something you don't want to do. You don't want to devote more time to something. He's like, biblical idolatry is something very specific.
Yeah.
Very, very specific.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of modern readers don't take it seriously when they read passages like in the Old Testament. It talks about that someone would cut down a tree and use some of the wood for a fire and make some into an idol and say, this is my God.
Yeah, exactly.
And people are like, oh, that's so silly.
Yeah.
But what they would do is they would consecrate that rock or that piece of wood or whatever, and they believe that the spirit they were worshiping was housed there.
Would dwell inside.
And that's actually one of the cool things about the temple of the Lord, that there was no image, right? One of God's commandments was you should have no graven images, right? And so they did not believe that God was embodied in an idol. They believed that they communicated with God directly.
Yeah, what does Paul say about God doesn't live in works made by human hands? Yep. He's everywhere.
Yeah. And he communicated with them directly. And then, we know from Genesis 1 that humans were created in God's image. So you want to know the image of God, a person is God's image.
Right.
So you can't make something into his image.
We're a walking, breathing image.
That's
I saw
honestly,
one, there was I don't remember what culture or religion it was, but they would carve these idols and they would carve the mouth. It would look like a little humanoid figure or whatever, but they would carve the mouth to where the mouth was wide open. And they would pray the spirit of the God in through the mouth of the idol, and it would go in through the mouth. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. That's what they believed. I heard one of the reasons, because like in Greece and in Rome, especially Rome, they did not tolerate, like they believed the emperor, the Caesar, was divine.
Right.
And so they did not tolerate people worshiping gods outside of what was kind of allowed by Rome.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, just make sure you put Caesar first.
Yeah. But one of the reasons that Romans were fascinated with Jews and allowed them to worship the way that they did was because when they would go in, like I remember hearing the story. I didn't look it up before this, so I don't know all the details, but that at some point they went into the temple, which they were not supposed to be in because they're Gentiles.
Yeah.
And when they saw where the ark was, there was no idol. And they were like, what are y'all worshiping?
Yeah.
And so they were fascinated by the idea that the Jews, they worshipped differently from everybody else.
They were different, yeah.
Yeah.
They were set apart.
Yeah.
Come on, somebody.
Bro, I got a ton of fun facts. I got another one.
Come on. Throw them facts.
This is one that I got from that.
Sling them facts.
I got this from another podcast that I was listening to. But the Ark of the Covenant has the 2 cherubim. So that's throne
This is
guardian
fresh in my
images.
mind because I just showed my kids Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yeah.
We just watched that movie the other night. And so the whole imagery of the Ark is like in my mind.
Real effective for killing Nazis.
Dude, my 9-year-old is watching this, when the spirit comes out of the Ark and melts the Nazis to nothing. Her eyes are just wide open. I was like, what do you think that is, sis? She's like, the power of God? I was like, yes.
Dude, the real mind bender is, would it have done anything? Because is the spirit of God still on the ark?
No, where is the Ark?
They found it.
They found it, yeah.
In this hypothetical situation, the Nazis found it.
I'm down with the Nazis melting. That's fun.
Yeah.
That's more fun.
Yeah. Well, the image, we were talking about Egyptian iconography, right? And that they would have winged serpents guarding the throne.
Yeah.
Well, something I heard was that when Pharaoh would travel, like when they would take their boats on the Nile or, whatever, I'm not an Egyptologist or whatever.
Yeah.
But the structures that they would use or the vehicles they would use would have the seraphim with their wings stretched out, touching each other, and they would have an idol in the middle.
Oh, wow.
And so it was protecting that image, right? And so think about the Ark of the Covenant. Same image. It's got the guardians with the wings stretched out, but there's no idol.
There's just a mercy seat.
Yeah.
Like a throne almost.
Yeah. And so God's presence was on the ark between the cherubim. It wasn't housed in an idol.
Right.
And so that's, again, just like we don't have that context in modern day. And so you don't know that God said, hey, this is what this image that you guys, this looks familiar.
This is what it means.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna blow your minds by, So again, I haven't done any research on that. I heard that somewhere and I thought it was pretty cool, so I'm repeating it because that's how you learn
That's
things.
how you do research and broadcast it to your audience.
Yeah.
Facebook said that.
But yeah, that's that guardian. That's that throne guardian imagery.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
have their wings.
Well, yeah, that's in every single religious culture. The whole idea of the Lamu and the friggin' what's it called?
Yeah, explain that real quick.
The Mesopotamian and Sumerian imagery of the cherubim, or it's got the guy's head with the braided beard. It's like that Babylonian looking guy, and he's got the body of a lion, and he's got wings. That whole amalgamation of human and beast melded together to guard the throne of the deity.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
So that's another throne guardian that
Exactly.
is part animal.
Yep.
So seraphim. Oh, that's important too. I think a lot of people think that,
Karibu and Lamu or something like that.
Yeah,
you can
and that's
look
where
those
the
up.
word cherubim, which is the Hebrew, that's cherubim. That's where that comes from, right?
Probably so.
Yeah.
That sounds logical.
Well, if I remember right, the difference in seraphim and cherubim, they're both throne guardians. They both do the same thing, and we just proved that with those Ezekiel and Genesis and all that.
Right.
I feel like that's enough to draw a conclusion from.
Definitely.
But, that's enough for me at least. I know that a lot of people think there's different classes of angels, cherubim look like this, seraphim look like this, then there's archangels, and there's all these different classes.
Yeah.
Well, really cherubim and seraphim are the same thing. It's just two different, I think the roots are from two different languages.
Two different cultural ideas of the same thing.
like that would be Babylonian.
Right.
And then, seraph.
The snake cobra with the wings is like Egyptian.
So I think that they're actually the same. I think they represent the same thing.
And that whole like iconography, I'm thinking of stuff I've watched is like the cobra when they flatten out their neck, it looked like a wing, on each side. And artists would just gradually like make those wings longer and longer to where it looks like big bird wings, but that was the winged serpent, was the cobra.
Yeah.
And dude, if you want to look up some crazy snakes, look up some king cobras from Egypt. Bro, it looks like a dang like fire department hose. The thing is like 5 or 6 inches around. The thing is huge. You can watch these like Indian guys. I was watching this video of these Indian guys picking this thing up. They were huge.
Yeah.
Very terrifying.
I wouldn't get anywhere near this.
And then the whole image of the being fiery and venomous. These things would spit venom at you. Spit venom right in your face.
Breathe fire,
bro. Breathing poison.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's the green dragons. I think they're poison.
Dragons.
I don't remember.
Dragons
Maybe it's black. Okay, something you mentioned earlier. I think we're gonna have to wrap this up soon, but you alluded to Tiamat earlier.
Yeah.
And
Chaos dragon.
Yeah, I think that's another connection to the serpent in Genesis. Is it a literal serpent?
Very much.
And we see serpent even in the book of Revelation. What the dragon is what assaults. And
the idea of it being the chaos dragon Tiamat, was in the ocean. It would stir the waters. The waters and the ocean was a place of chaos. You can't tame it. You're just subject to it. And it was this idea of these behemoths and leviathans and Tiamat, these huge mythical type creatures.
Yeah. There's several mentioned throughout the Bible.
It was that imagery of like chaos and instability.
Yep.
Which goes right along with the serpent, causing chaos and confusion and instability in God's word.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, chaos. And I actually looked up, so you were talking about Tiamat, that's from the Enuma Elish, which is the
Enuma Elish, or however you want to say it.
Babylonian, or like it's the book of Genesis for Babylon. It's
pretty much
their creation,
their
myth.
Origin, yeah.
And so I'm not using the word myth there to mean something that's not true, by the way.
Let's define what myth actually means.
Yeah, myths and legends.
So myth does not mean that it's not real, despite how people use it in modern context. Yeah, you can get a lot of people
triggered with that one.
Right, they'll say, that's a myth. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that it's not true. Myth is just a story that involves divine beings or gods or, legends of that sort. It doesn't mean that it's not real or not true or didn't happen. It's mythic. When you say something is mythic, it's a type of writing that involves deities.
Yeah,
but of course, the naturalists and humanists are going to say that's not real, so that's how they use it. But that's not what it means.
Yeah. So I really wanted to talk about this because we're still not done with Genesis 3. We got to talk about.
Yeah, where did we start? Now the serpent.
Yeah, we're still on literally the first verse.
The first
of
3
Genesis.
words. Yeah, I knew we were not going to get this in one episode.
But sure. We still got to talk about. I'm really interested in talking about the tree. Like not today, obviously, but we got to talk about Adam and Eve. We got to talk about the curse. We got to talk about the tree. I promised people some Trinity examples, but that's going to have to wait now.
Ooh, well, everything good for those who wait.
Yeah. Well, the Babylonian creation myth. This will be a good conclusion and segue into the next episode. That a lot of people think that the story of the Bible is Jesus versus the devil, right? He's saving us from the devil. A lot of people don't look at the broader scope that chaos really is a factor. That's in the end, death and chaos are what's going to be defeated. And in Genesis 1 last week, we were talking about how you can't take let there be light as literal light because it wasn't sun and moon. I guess the word literal is dangerous because it is literal. It's not real physical light,
Right, yeah.
So
like we know light.
Yeah, not the way we would think of it. A good way to look at that Genesis story is God creating order out of chaos. Mm-hmm. And John called that light life, right? And so he created light and he separated it from the darkness. And then you look at things like the Enuma Elish, however it's pronounced, the Babylonian story, that's similar to what they say happened. That, and I'm not trying to give credibility to that, but again, you take all these myths and you put them together and you realize, like, maybe they're all similar for a reason.
Exactly. Yeah, they're all explaining the same event.
Yeah.
In their own perspectives.
It would be
not that they have, not that their perspective is correct.
Right.
If it's like you get a group of people that see the same event, they're all going to give you a similar story.
Exactly. You're going to get different people's part of the story. Right, or if you listen to like, CNN or Fox News.
Oh, geez.
You're going to believe whichever.
Don't listen to either.
But that's a good showing of like, if you're biased, you're going to believe, I believe CNN or I believe Fox News, but they're talking about the same story. So that doesn't mean the story's fake.
Right.
It just means that they might have a bad perspective, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But so there's all these stories about the creation of the world and the flood and all that stuff, and even giants, like when we get to giants later. And it doesn't mean that stuff isn't real. It's just filtering out what is bias. Like this culture was trying to say they were right, right? And we believe that the Bible is the correct one, the correct interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the Babylonian creation myth, there like literally everything kind of existed as one primordial blob, and then like fresh water and chaos or bitter water separated.
Yeah.
And that chaos was Tiamat.
Right.
And long story short, just kind of skipping to the end, the Babylonian god Marduk defeated chaos with like shot an arrow, split Tiamat in half,
the dragon,
and used her remains to create the earth and the heavens. And then there was one of the other gods that was like rebellious, and he killed them and used their remains to make humans. And he used the humans' job. Guess what the humans' job was? Help the gods maintain order.
Oh, well, what do you know?
So it's this constant battle. Like everybody knows light and dark, but we don't think about chaos as an enemy. And God is saying, I'm going to put an end to chaos. And it's similar to how he made Adam to be a steward. Like you had God, you had the sons of God that are in the picture, the Elohim, and then you have Adam. And Adam was meant to be a steward over the earth. So his job was to defeat chaos on earth almost.
Right. Like, and just another thought is a lot of scholars, and I would tend to start to lean this way now, is that Genesis was a polemic.
Yeah.
And polemic being like a very strong written way of combating what other cultures are presenting as truth.
Yeah.
Like, they're presenting, it was Marduk and he fought Tiamat and this is how it all happened. And, the Bible writers were like, well, no, he's like, that sounds familiar, but here's how it actually happened. And so it was this combative alternate view of like, here's the truth.
And the ultimate, I'm glad you used that word polemic.
Yeah.
The ultimate insult to the Babylonian story is real subtle in the book of Genesis. The Babylonian story has this big war going on. The good gods and Marduk versus Tiamat and the bad gods.
Yeah.
And there's this war, there's this struggle, and eventually the good guys win and they create the earth and humans and everything. But in Genesis, what happens? God says, let there be light. And there was light. Boom, done.
Yeah.
And he said, the light's good. I'm going to separate the light from the darkness. Showing that, he doesn't say it, but it implies the darkness is not good, right?
Right.
Because he says the light is good and then separates the two. And so the whole story of the Bible is that battle of like light versus dark, order versus chaos.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it earlier that even like the Hebrew law, the law of Moses, their lives are supposed to be in order and peace. And the other nations were going to look at them and go, surely the Lord is the one true God.
They were supposed to look different than all the other nations.
But I'm glad that you mentioned Tiamat because I think that's a good place to fit that in. Like the perspective. Well, we've said this like on our first episode that there's this whole story that's been going on even before humanity existed.
Right. The story of existence is not about humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're part of the story, but it's not about us. It's about Jesus. It's about God, Yahweh, and what He's doing. And how He's redeeming the whole of creation. He didn't just die for our sins as humans. Yes, He did, but there's a big picture. He's redeeming all of it.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah. So
you forget that,
You have light versus dark, life versus death, order versus chaos. These are all themes that you're going to see all throughout the Bible, and they start right there in Genesis 1. Yeah, man. Well, we'll get into it later because, dude, I can't wait to talk about.
We appreciate you guys coming. Ryan has 75 more pages of notes, but we'll have to get to that next time.
We're going to have to do like, I was so ready for Genesis 5 and 6 to be the next episode.
Oh, bro, it's not. No, we're taking our time. We're taking our time through this.
Man, at this rate, Genesis 3 is going to take like a year.
It's so good, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how action-packed the Bible is. Anybody who says that, the Bible is boring, they have no idea what they're doing. And I was like that for a little while. I was like, I'm not reading my Bible. It's so boring. I've read it before.
Well, you feel like, again, when you read it in our modern day context, it's like,
boring.
I've read it. I got, like, I know it. I got it.
Yeah,
I read
exactly.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus died for me. Okay, got it.
But man, there's just so much more. It's awesome.
But we would like for you to connect with us if you enjoyed this fun banter and Bible and that's a new phrase for us right there, banter and Bible.
B&B.
But yeah, mystery. I like what you came up with, Ryan. Mysteries of the past and present.
Yeah, we had to give a little tagline.
Differentiate ourselves from the other 1,500 behind the curtain podcasts.
Yeah.
But ours is special.
Yes, it's something. It's special, all right.
Special. Any podcast that talks about the Bible in depth and goes off into these fun topics and even more fun topics to come. We start talking about aliens and dinosaurs and conspiracy theories and maybe a little bit of Bigfoot. And does that stuff go along with the Bible? We're going to find out. So stay tuned. And, follow us on Instagram at behindthecurtainpc. And if you have a question or any concerns, or if you want to pray for me and Ryan,
these guys are nuts.
Or if you need to correct our theology or something like that, that's fun. You can get us at behindthecurtainpc@gmail.com. Man, share the podcast with your friends and family. Spotify, Anchor, Google, Apple. We're all on all the cool hip podcasting thingies. Ryan, any last words?
I'm having a blast. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yes, thanks for coming. See ya.